welcome back to another episode of Treknicity. You know, the show where we talk about things to do with, you guessed it, Star Trek. I'm your host, Lars and The Capt, coming to you from somewhere beyond the cosmos, or in this case, as always, Southern California, which is pretty much one and the same because there's a reason why they call it Hollyweird. And joining me again for this episode is my good friend and companion, my co-host, the Captain. But I have to summon him because he is in another dimension, and there is only one way I can bring him to the fore, and that is by saying his name 3 times. So let's get right down to it. Or as they say in the business, let's get down to the rat killing. Frank.
Shore leave in 1 week.
Okay. I don't
want just doing crew schedules.
I see. So, well, it's that time of the week again. Even though it's been a little bit of a break since I went on my own personal shore leave, and yes, but
extended leave here too. So we're kind of in the same boat there.
Of course. Well, that's good. So, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be talking about role-playing in the Star Trek universe, and given the fact that you are yourself a role-playing game character in a Star Trek...
Hold on a second. I tend to differ with that. I think I'm very much alive.
I didn't say you weren't alive. I just said you're a character in a role-playing game.
Well, I'll at least give you that I might be a character.
True. So yeah, we're going to actually talk about the many different incarnations of official role-playing games that have been issued under the Star Trek name and Star Trek license. And then, of course, we can't talk about Star Trek role-playing games without talking about the Wilderness Years homebrew system. Given the fact that it's a very unique type of system to play, it has to have a discussion about it. So, as you can see on the screen there, I've put up a graphic for Star Trek Adventures, which is it's the latest in the games. I've got it right here. I actually have the core rule book right here in my hands. I'm holding up, and it's a really good system to play on that I've seen so far. I haven't actually run it yet, but I have read a good portion of the book. But anyways, I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit.
Isn't that about the 4th try at a Star Trek gaming system?
I believe you are right. I believe it is the 4th incarnation of the role-playing game. The first one that was created was done by a company called FASA. They created a role-playing game. They got the licensing from Paramount and from Gene Roddenberry to create a role-playing game based on the adventures of the Star Trek or the Starship Enterprise. That being said, they did a couple of revisions, and then they did a lot of supplements for different races: the Klingons, the Romulans, the Orions. They did adventure modules. They did source books. They had quite a collection. They also did the Starship Tactical Combat Simulator board game, which I spent many hours playing as a teenager. It was very convoluted, but not that difficult to play. The only thing is that it didn't last a real long time, because FASA kind of irritated Gene Roddenberry, because Gene's vision for Star Trek was a utopian future, and they focused a lot on militaristic combat in the first Star Trek role-playing game.
Especially conflicts between the Federation and the Klingons, the Federation and the Romulans. It just dealt a lot about... It was basically designed as more of a combat game than an exploration game.
Exactly. It was very interesting. In fact, I still remember that I based a lot of character development and whatnot for the Wilderness Years system from information I gleaned from the FASA system. But of course, when the Wilderness Years was still a full time, full on system being played, that was the only one available. Um, so of course there wasn't anything else to go off of besides. I think at the time, I think Star Trek: The Next Generation was still in its infancy when FASA lost their license, and they weren't, there really wasn't anything. There really wasn't anything new that came out for quite some time. Um, it was a percentage based system. It was. I still remember the character sheet. It must have had, you know, 90, 90 different skills on one page. My goodness, it was insane.
Now, when you're developing a character, aren't you supposed to like look through books and stuff? See, holodecks cover most of the role playing in my, place and time. But aren't you supposed to like look at pages and pages of skills and powers and abilities like those 90 you're talking about on the character sheet? And then you're supposed to like select however many according to your level of those. Is that correct?
Yes. Like I said, the system was a percentage based system, so you raised or lowered the percentage value of certain skills based on different criteria as you were creating your character. And again, it was a very convoluted system, so trying to create characters took a long time. To be honest with you, I think I only played. I could probably count on one hand the number of times that I actually played the faster version of the role playing game as a teenager. I ended up buying the deluxe version of the game again some years later. Unfortunately, it was stolen, and I have yet to replace it. But it, despite the fact its difficulty and its limitations, it certainly did pave the way for its successors to be able to come out.
Now, isn't it also true that like AD&D was big during the fastest Star Trek, and a lot of the role playing out at that time was at least loosely based on Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, I think just about any role playing game that was out at that time had some roots in the TSR D&D system, whether it be the basic or whether it be the first or second editions of the advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Because again, as we said with that first one, it was more combat oriented. Now, I've checked some records with the old FASA system, and in fact, FASA did another sci-fi system as well for another science fiction program called Doctor Who. And its books were confusing to say the least, and very convoluted, and again, very, very combat-oriented, which didn't quite seem to fit the program it was trying to base itself on.
Exactly, since Doctor Who itself is not... It was designed as an educational science adventure series initially, and then expanded into a more cerebral program for more adult viewers. And so FASA kind of took the same approach with Doctor Who as they did with the Star Trek system, and
there was a lot of like movement points and this kind of thing. You almost needed, to have a cotton picking, I don't know, graph page sitting in front of you trying to map out anything your character was trying to do. It also made it difficult to really do a role of any particular race, human or otherwise, because you were all caught up in how to get your character to do whatever it is the character was trying to do.
Yep, absolutely. Which, of course, did contribute to the company losing its license for both franchise of the role playing games. And like I said, after they lost their license, they ended up going on to, kind of doing another system called Shadowrun, which again they lost the license for that too, or they sold it. Either way, but it did, like I said, it did set the stage for its successors to be able to come in and do that. Speaking of the successors, the next version of the Star Trek role playing game was that by a company called Last Unicorn Games. I still remember running that. I ran it for a little bit when I was living in New Zealand, and it was a simpler system. It was a much simpler system to use, but it still dragged on a bit, and I think I ran it for a couple of months before I ultimately gave up on it because, again, they weren't focusing on what Star Trek was about, and it was kind of almost like, not speaking specifically about Spelljammer, but it was more like let's make D&D with a Star Trek flavor to it, and that the way they did it didn't work out so well. And to my knowledge, I think they only had a couple of books published under that license, and no sooner than it was created, it was it disappeared.
Now, in both of those games, I'm assuming you had a character or two that you also played in the game.
Of course.
Were there particular characters that you were more leaned toward in the earlier games that you found more enjoyable to play?
Well, actually, like I said, the FASA system allowed me to glean a lot of information, which I then took over to the Wilderness Years system. My character Savon, whom I created when I was 14 years old, and for anybody doing their math, that was 31 years ago. I gained a lot of great information that allowed me to develop the character and move on into the other systems. So, to answer your questions, the character Savon was born from the FASA system, based on information I had at the time. In fact, I think some of it came from the Starfleet Intelligence source books. As far as Last Unicorn Games, I didn't play, I ran the game, so I didn't play it as a player so much. I GM'd it, and it was, it was very story oriented, but at the same time, you still had a certain level of complexity to the system that did hinder the enjoyment a bit.
I never played in the Unicorn system, but as I said, our ship's records and stuff made records of old systems because it helps with holodeck programming, believe it or not. Since you get in a holodeck and you can assign yourself a character and a background and a place and different people to interact with, they served as a good blueprint for how to make a holodeck work. And with the FASA system, I played in it myself maybe 3 times, and I found it very complex, very confusing, and again, I can't stress enough, too combat oriented.
The whole thing about Star Trek is that it's all about exploration and adventure. Sure, I mean there has to be some conflict because the universe is not perfect, but you know they had to refocus a bit. Um, After last Unicorn Games moved on and basically lost the license, I think they shut down completely. A company called Decipher picked up the Star Trek role playing game, and they put out a couple of books. I think two or three books, um, and again they tried to build a system. And in fact, they tried to build a system that wasn't more standardized. So it was a very um, I won't say homebrew, but it was very different than the other systems that were out there. Um, Now, with any role playing game, if you don't have a system or a game engine that is intuitive, then you make it difficult to play, and hence you make it difficult to enjoy. Um, I've played in enough role playing games, enough systems in my life to know that if you have to have a master's degree to understand the system, then it's not going to be that much fun.
Not going to be worth playing. You're going to have to sit down there hours just to try figuring out what the hell kind of character you're going to run, let alone trying to plan a ship, a world, a mission. Who wants all that nonsense?
Exactly. Um, and I played the Decipher game with some friends in New Zealand. It lasted a few months, and then we ended up moving on to other games and stuff. It's not that I didn't like it; it's just that it wasn't it wasn't a very intuitive system. Um, you know, even the current one, the Star Trek Adventures by Modifius, um, it is a simpler system in many respects. However, just so to show anybody, this is the thickness of the book. Okay, it is the book is over an inch thick. So
Still a heck of a lot of reading to do.
it is. It's a ton of reading to do, and then it's a ton of things to remember. And this is just the core book. I mean, um, to put things into perspective, there's that, and then if I can get it without pulling 100 things out of the way, this is the next book, which is called These Are the Voyages. This is the first adventure compendium that was created and released for Star Trek Adventures. Um, you know, Probably 3/4 of an inch thick, which you have to accommodate for a certain number of player or a certain number of adventures and stuff, which is fine. But you know, look, I'm getting old. I'm in my mid 40s now, and um, I don't think I have a lot of time or attention span to read a 300-page book. And
Now, you keep talking about running games. You've evidently done a lot of that. In part of the rules of the game, though, if you're running it, you can actually decide how much of the system you do or do not wish to use.
certain, well, that is of course something to consider. But there's a point, there's a reason why these materials were created. They were created to give you as rich a playing experience as possible, and you can opt to overlook certain parts of it or not use certain parts of the rules because they don't fit with you, or they don't make sense to you, or you don't want to incorporate that, and you know then we start getting into the homebrew area of talking about things, which we'll get to here in just a second. But you know, the system that Modifius came up with for Star Trek Adventures, it is easier. It's basically 2D20 and 2D6. for the most part, and everything else is kind of straightforward. It's combining a couple of different stats, and that's it. And, so the process of role of the mechanics of the game are simpler than anything else I'd seen before. But again, still, the book is over an inch thick, so they have an epic ton of material to go through. I mean, the inside cover is a map of the Alpha Quadrant, and I mean, it is crazy.
Probably not even accurate. I could set them straight on that if they talked to me.
Yeah, well, wow. That's creating a starship, creating planets, you know, uh, different different supplements and adventures and stuff. It makes my head spin sometimes. Um, so good system, so far from what I've read, it seems like it's going to be easy enough to run. I will be running it here before too long, and I've got a friend and my wife and perhaps yourself will be involved in that whole process. So, yeah, so we'll see where it goes. The next thing I really wanted to talk about is being a player. I really wanted to talk about being a player in the Star Trek universe, because there's only one system that I really really played in for an extended period of time, and then that is of course the Wilderness Years, which is your universe.
Okay, if you say so. I'll tell you my biggest complaint with all those booked role playing games was it seemed a lot more ROLL playing, rolling dice to do this. You go to the bathroom, roll the dice to see if you go successfully. Role playing, ROLE, like holodecks and holosuites and the like, you actually assume the part of a character. You do your character lines. You can do your character actions in the holodeck. Now, given a table setting for a game, you can't have a group of people going around and swinging swords and firing phasers, but they can still do their lines and be a little more personal. Put some of their own stuff in. Actually play the role.
As in become the character, instead of the character becoming you.
Exactly. By the way, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just said that was one of my biggest complaints, and I wanted to get that on record. Well, so you wanted to talk about your experience playing in a game.
Right. Now, the Wilderness Years itself, when I got into it, it was largely in the format it was the entire time I played. I believe that the ship at the time when I joined was actually had been renamed by the crew to be called the Prophet. And then for some reason, at some point in the future after that, it was decided to rename it back to its original name of the Wilderness. But I that's where I took my character save on, and I actually grew as a person playing a character who was an idealized version of myself. And that's the heart and soul of a role playing game. We don't play role playing games because we're bored. We play role playing games. We play characters in role playing games because it gives us an opportunity to explore different parts of our personalities that we can't do in real life.
Gives us an opportunity to be in our own movie or TV show, even if it just happens to be in our own imaginations.
Yeah, the theater of the mind. And, the whole thing with it is that, I know as a teenager, I spent hours, days playing in the role of this character. But the wonderful part about it is that since it was technically in the Star Trek universe, um, even though I mean, it did have elements of different systems, which it was an amalgamation of different franchises, universes, ideas, concepts, whatever you want to call it. But the mechanics of the game were so that, as you said, it was less of the rolling of dice and more of the rolling of character.
The playing of the role.
Right. And I think that is the hallmark of a system that keeps people coming back. I've played in games throughout my gaming career, if you like, where I was completely enamored with the system and the game and wanting to play as often as possible, because that's exactly what we did. We played the game. We didn't have to bring a bucket of dice. It's not like we were playing Champions or anything, where we had to have the old big giant plastic cups full of dice to make an attack.
Right.
But you were invested in playing your character in a unique and interesting universe. I mean, it wasn't always roses. It wasn't always everything was perfect, but it was always consistently good and enjoyable.
Well, I can give you the accurate history of the wilderness.
Well, I would hope so.
It would take a while, but briefly, if we go back to the Genesis planet, as you recall, life from lifelessness. The proto-matter, I think it was, that was used that was unstable, enabled it to reform and become inhabited. A rescue party was sent in a ship, and the person in charge of the group of survivors happened to be a descendant of a Native American. And so he called the ship his wilderness.
Okay.
And then they all left and went to Starfleet, and it was a whole new world for them. They had to be re-educated and everything, but they had to leave because Genesis was about to go kablooey again. And they were all about to die. Like I said, they were the few group of survivors. Now, this is in my dimension, so this is a history I lived. That's not saying it's Star Trek Prime Dimension or canon, so no one has to take it as that. But they got re-educated. And then eventually a new captain took over the ship. And the crew changed hands a number of times. And part of the crew decided, including the captain's wife, that they wanted to become rebels. And so, since the captain had the ownership of the ship, that being myself, it wasn't quote-unquote a Starfleet ship. But the wife wanted to go profiteering and try to be a space pirate for a while. Hence the name The Prophet. Well, that career died quickly. My wife became more mature, I guess you could say, and then went on to other assignments. Shortly thereafter, it was a marriage that ended. It was my second ended marriage, but, things happen. I guess when you're married to your ship, you don't have much room for other romance.
Yes, I could agree with that.
Although my first romance came before I became in charge of the ship and ended up becoming its owner. But there was just something about the ship. Anyway, so that's how the Prophet came to actually be. I, of course, being the owner, loved the name The Wilderness and returned it to its proper status as a Starfleet ally, though an independent colony.
And I still remember that Starfleet basically tried to finagle us into doing all manner of things for them. Um, it was almost like we were our own A team because we were always being harassed and chased by the government, so to speak. But it did have its charm. It did have its adventure.
Nevertheless, that was my history of my ship. Evidently, you had some parallels in your gaming experience.
Exactly. So the good thing about it is that it was born from a D&D system that went from high fantasy to sci-fi, but kept the basic mechanics of a D&D system, which was really made it a lot easier for especially for people who were newer to gaming. Um, and made it a lot easier for people to acclimate to the system, which of course increased its enjoyability.
And your game master, I'm assuming, must have shared a similar thought with me and was more interested in the character development than the mechanics and battles of the game.
Exactly. I did create some friction between myself and the game master from time to time because I was very detail oriented and very regimented when it came to things like that. But in the end, I think we found a happy medium.
Now, this character you'd mentioned, your Ceylon character, tell us a little bit about him and what it was like playing him.
Well, he started off with the idea. I was always impressed with the character of Savick from Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock. Um, so I wanted to play. I wanted to play a character that had the mental discipline and I guess physical attributes of a Vulcan, while at the same time having the more passionate personality of a Romulan. So I did a Vulcan slash Romulan character. Um, he was started off as I think an ensign on the ship. Was the navigator, and through I guess various different adventures and whatnot, he moved into engineering and eventually became first officer of the ship. And I've played that character in many different incarnations throughout the 30 years that since I created him. Um, so it was it was an opportunity to express part of my personality that I couldn't express in the real world, um, and seeing what kind of adventures that I could get into and what kind of trouble I could get him into.
Again, another parallel to mine because I had a first officer a couple centuries ago now with that name and was a Vulculan, at least that's what I called him, half Vulcan, half Romulan. Very interesting person to say the least. He went on to become a captain of his own ship and then a fleet captain and a co-ambassador with Spock through Vulcan and Romulus.
Well, for me, the character took on a different, completely different, I guess, form, if you like, after playing him in the role playing game. I played him in a play by email system where I ran him as a Starfleet Marine, and I've kept him in that form since then because I do enjoy a certain level of military presence in Star Trek, because we all know that Starfleet could never could never exist as long as it has without some form of defense. So I wanted to explore that with my character, and that's what I've done with him. But at one point, during the play by email system, he went from being just a Marine to becoming an officer to eventually becoming executive officer for a space station, which was known as the First Contact Office. Yeah, and I think it was the last. That was the last time I played him fully. But yeah, that's still sort of the the path I took him in. So yeah, I mean, I think I've had a lot of fun with this particular character. I think I've had a lot of fun role playing in the Star Trek universe. I've been hoping to find somebody who is familiar with the new Modiphius system, so I can play in it. But I'll settle for running in it for the time being until such time as I do find somebody else who wants to run the system.
Well, you get one advantage with any game you run. You can have some of your own characters. You just can't let them manipulate the plot of the main characters. You can offer suggestions. You can have them there to live or die. You can have them there as allies. You can have them there for misinformation. But you can generally run your own non-player character as an ongoing role, provided you work within those limits.
True, and they actually do provide for that eventuality in this game. They were referred to as supporting characters. So, and I have created Savon as a supporting character for when I do actually get this off the ground. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how it goes and continuing on with my role-playing experience in the Star Trek universe. Still my favorite universe to game in. I look forward to seeing what kind of adventures come up and run in the future.
And I wish you the best on that. I have one last question for you.
Certainly.
As you were portraying and developing this character, were you in any way, shape, or form able to help give him a life of his own and then help apply it to yours?
That's actually something that is inherent with good role playing, is that the character is born from you and it grows on its own with your guidance, but eventually that character goes on, hopefully, to shape you in its own way as well. So I am more like Savon now than I was when I created him. If that makes any sense.
I think it does, because as you said, the character you're familiar with started in a fantasy world, and as best as I've been able to understand, has developed a life of his own. Ergo, you're talking to me on a usually weekly basis.
Exactly. It's the real world talking to a representation of the fantasy world.
I guess I can live with that.
Well, it has been wonderful talking about role-playing games. I know that it's a topic we probably could talk about again for a very long time. However, yeah, we'll leave it here for now. And we just want to thank everybody for watching the show and listening to us blather at each other about playing role-playing games and being part of the Star Trek universe. We haven't settled on the topic for the next episode because we're going to rejig things up or kind of mix it up a little bit. So I'm not going to give you a preview of what we're doing next because, quite frankly, we don't know.
Just don't know.
That's right. So at that point, we're going to say goodbye. And as always here on Treknicity, we want
until next time,
rock out
with your Spock out.
See you later, folks. Bye.